Like, Moses was adopted by the ancient Egyptian royal family of the time, innit? And they were obviously black. And Moses had no clue he was adopted for most of his life. So you think there's going to be one white kid, yeah, amongst a whole black family now? And he's like, yeah, this is definitely my family, my mum and dad, my brother and sister.
750 million. That's how many Afro-descendants in the community today are Christians. This is, in fact, a good thing because, at its core, the values being taught, kindness, selflessness, meditation, prayer, and a sense of belonging, are positive. However, what is not good is the cultural baggage that has come with and been forced upon black people and Afro-descendants everywhere. This is why it is important to separate your faith from the culture that was taught to you. If you believe in and love Jesus, and if Jesus has been a saving figure in your life, that cannot be a bad thing. Countless lives have been saved by turning to a higher power. Yet, while the psychological and spiritual benefits of such faith are recognized, one cannot disregard the psychological damage caused by having a God who appears in opposition to your phenotype, someone who does not look like you, but resembles the people who have oppressed your ancestors. I cannot stress this enough. In fact, in our previous video, we demonstrated how insults directed at black people are a primary cause of underperformance in the academic field, so much so that, overnight, the racial achievement gap can be closed by 40% simply by priming students with positive role models and self-affirmation statements. So then, what do you think is the effect of seeing, Sunday after Sunday, book after book, movie after movie, that the God you pray to isn't like you, that the God you pray to looks like the people who have historically hated you? And I'm not suggesting that it is the entire white population that has oppressed Afro-descendant people, but even a significant percentage is enough for the detrimental mental effects to persist. It is important to keep these things in mind before we move on to the subject of the true face and origin of those about whom the Bible speaks. From the original Jews and the Egyptians themselves, to the Philistines, the Canaanites, the 12 tribes mentioned, the original concept of Yeshua, and even down to the Ethiopians, and the majority, if not all, of the prophets, all of them are undeniably of black and African descent. The Bible says so, archaeology says so, and genetics say so. And we will see all of that today. I will also show you why the spiritual concepts taught in the Bible are, in fact, ancient African spiritual concepts. From the Trinity to the resurrection, from the mountain ceremonies to the miracles and the 10 Commandments, all of it originates from Black Africa. This is why I often state in my videos that only through a diligent study of the past can one perceive the mosaic of the self. These original concepts, these teachings, were so powerful that they were appropriated all over the world, quite literally. They were reappropriated into versions of religions that today are embedded in scriptures of hatred, where slavery is condoned, discrimination is rampant, and a loving God is invoked to decimate entire peoples in an angry fit of insecurity, as reflected in the followers of these new religions who claim to hold an unbreakable truth. And yet the balance you seek, the freedom you have long desired, was given to you by the Ancient One, so that one day you will free yourself from fear, oppression, and inadequacy, that you will emerge from the desert in which you have walked for 400 years and hold in your hands the tablets that will liberate the authentic 13 tribes of Judah. This is the Without History channel. Every episode, we bring salient facts about African ancient civilizations and history, and detail how these civilizations contributed to our modern world. We dive deep into what research has to say about the often overlooked or misattributed contributions of these key eras in our collective history. Without History does not accept any sponsorship precisely so that we can remain independent. And it is through all your small donations on Patreon, YouTube, and those who share our videos on their social media that we are able to continue our work. Noah's sons are said to be Cush, Libya, Ethiopia, Mizrahin, and Put, nations in Africa. All of them were black. Punt is, in fact, the land that the Egyptians refer to as Punt. The Egyptians even depicted what the people of Punt looked like. Before we move further, it is important for us to look at a map and situate ourselves. We often view these names as if they refer to faraway lands, always associated with Asia, but I will show you that almost all of the nations mentioned in the Bible, at least the major ones, are situated within the landmass of Africa. The Egyptians, the Nubio-Kemetic people, were in Africa. I say were in Africa rather than are in Africa, because the Egyptians who live in Africa today are not the same as the ancient Egyptians. This has been proven by genetics. In fact, if you examine the genetics of several mummies, they have been shown to be over 90% sub-Saharan African. You can see that King Tut is 93% sub-Saharan African, which means that his father, Akhenaton himself, could not have been anything else than a black African. Same goes for the famous Ramses III and Amenhotep III, whom many historians consider to have ruled over the highest point in ancient Egyptian culture. And these are just the ones that we have been allowed to test so far. Even the genetics of those in the early phases of what we call ancient Egyptian civilization show they carried the L0F genetic marker. This marker can only be found in sub-Saharan Africa, originating in southern Africa, not in Asia, not in Europe, but deeper within the continent of Africa, where many Eurasian groups are also found. Today, many comfort themselves with the idea that only Ethiopians and a few other nations mentioned in the Bible were black, mainly because Ethiopia is one of the few nations that has remained predominantly black throughout history. However, this line of thinking is misleading, as it would imply that the racial makeup of a country never changes. We only need to look at Spain and its 700-year Moorish occupation to see that this is not true. Even in America, we can see that the racial makeup of North America today is drastically different from that of America 600 years ago, when almost only Native Americans dwelled there. So when we talk about the racial makeup of the ancient Sahara, we have the outstanding research of Dr. Boubacar Sall, who states, "Ancient Sahara, the one before the desert, reaffirms its ethnic and cultural origins as Black African." This is also corroborated by the multiple genetic studies that show that the early inhabitants of the region, the Natufians, had clear African genetic markers without any Neanderthal DNA. In other words, they were Black Africans. By the way, these were the same people who invented agriculture and went on to build Göbekli Tepe, as we saw in previous videos. It's important to note that when Moses' family criticizes him in the Bible for marrying an Ethiopian wife, they are not criticizing her because she is black. They are criticizing him because the Egyptians were proud and did not like to mix with other nations, especially Ethiopians, Libyans, and Assyrians. The Ethiopians frequently married the Nubians. In fact, the Egyptians did not distinguish themselves from the Nubians. This is clearly seen in the canon of Lepsius, where both the Egyptians and the Nubians are drawn with the same features, distinctly different from those easily recognizable as European or Asiatic, Levantine, the Arab of today. And what do you see? How did the Egyptians draw themselves? Let's hear it from the greatest Egyptologist in history, the one who uncovered an untold number of secrets about Kemet.
The Egyptians were black men, like black men that you see in Africa now.
Ici, cette reproduction est importante.
This is a very important reproduction.
C'est dans le tombeau de Ramsès III.
This is found in the tomb of Ramses III,
20e dynastie.
the 20th dynasty.
Vous avez le personnage de gauche.
The person on the left,
C'est le type général, donc, représenté par l'artiste égyptien lui-même.
this is the general type represented by the Egyptian artist himself.
Le second, c'est le type général de tous les Européens,
And the second person or personage is the general type of all the Europeans
Yes.
represented by the artist.
Le troisième, c'est le type général de tous les autres noirs de l'intérieur du continent.
And the third personage is the general type representing all the other groups found in the interior of the continent.
Of Africa.
Of the continent of Africa.
Oui. Le quatrième, c'est le type général de tous les Sémites habitant l'Asie.
The fourth personage is the general type of all of the Semites living in that area of Asia.
Et ceci est un tableau ethnographique. Voilà les races qui existaient à l'époque, telles que les Égyptiens les ont connues, vues et représentées.
This is
De différentes races.
the different races represented by the artist, and these are the races that existed in his time as he saw them.
Nous sommes à 1200 avant Jésus-Christ.
We are 1,200 years before Jesus Christ.
Yes. Donc, vous voyez que les Égyptiens ne se sont jamais confondus avec les Européens.
So
ni,
the Egyptians were never confused with the Europeans,
ni avec les Sémites.
nor with the Semites.
Unmistakably black. It is almost as if the Egyptians were proclaiming from the rooftops that they should not be confused with other races. And yet today, there are people who do not know the truth and who get angry when these facts are brought out. They try to claim that the Egyptians were of Arabic descent, and they try to support their argument by the lighter skin tones seen in Egyptian paintings, which in fact are the result of progressively and intentionally lighter and lighter repainting over the years. Yet still, the phenotypes cannot lie. High cheekbones, a triangular torso and shoulders, generous lips, nappy hair, and almond-shaped eyes, and for those they couldn't cheat, dark brown to black skin tones. And if you are a wanted figure, a prophet, who wants to blend into the Egyptian population, then you should have the same skin tone as the people of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. This is exactly where Jesus went to hide. He went to hide in Egypt, the same Egypt that the Romans drew as follows during the late period at the end of the Egyptian civilization. We will come back to other evidence of Jesus' racial makeup later. For now, let's look at Simon of Cyrene. Simon of Cyrene, the man who carried Jesus' cross, came from the region of Cyrenaica in modern-day Libya. Libya was occupied by black people until the Arab invasion, so Simon was most certainly black. All of these biblical figures have been historically drawn with one distinctive feature. It literally shows up everywhere, a feature that is easily explained once it is put into its proper African context. In the Bible, there are many references to prophets or angels having, quote, white woolly hair. You need to realize that one of the things that happens to black people's hair as they turn gray is that, number one, it becomes white, not gray, and it still retains its curly nature. This means that the image of the ancient wise man would not have been a Gandalf-like figure, but an older black person with a black beard and a crown of white hair. This is very interesting because if you picture it in your mind, it would be like someone who had a halo. Just like this. In fact, the concept of a halo only makes sense if it is either a completely supernatural invention or an imitation of the natural hair of a black man or black woman, especially older, naturally white hair. But there are many more quotes that validate the true origins of the peoples and nations mentioned in the Bible. Let's see some of these salient quotes. But maybe I will start with the one everyone wants to hear about. There is one place in the Bible where they actually describe the physical characteristics of Jesus, Yeshua, as some call him. In Revelations 1:14, Jesus' hair is described as white like wool. But even more telling, in Daniel 7:9, we get a description of God himself. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. We see here again that description of woolly hair, white hair, but this time in attribution to God himself, or the highest deity in the Christian pantheon. Interesting to see that he too sports a halo of white woolly hair. In Genesis 10:9 we read the following: the sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Many have taken this to mean that only these nations are or could have black people within them. This is where I would like to point out to you a few studies that you will find interesting. We have already seen the studies showing that the ancient Egyptians were black from the pre-dynastic era to the late kingdom, well after the pyramids were built. We already know the Ethiopians were black, because the term has been used to describe the blackest of black people throughout ages. And yes, it was used to describe the Egyptians and Nubians too. The British Museum of Natural History holds the largest collection of Kish remains. These were analyzed and classified by anthropologist Faris Supia using FORDISC 2.0 to determine the affinities of the individuals and the population as a whole. FORDISC 2.0, the Forensic Discriminant Program, enables precise classification of ethnic origin given a cranial sample. Note that the designation Egyptian here refers to the Nubio-Kemetic populations, which, as we have seen, are indistinguishable from Africans living south of the Sahara. The same applies to other non-Eurasian classifications that are directly attributable to Africans. The analysis clearly shows that the predominant associations were African, as can be seen in the summary table. Furthermore, consistent with previous data, the presence of non-African stock begins to increase only in the late period. This suggests that, as in ancient Nubio-Kemet, millennia after Africans had established the civilization, along with all its defining elements, surrounding peoples not only began to immigrate to Kish and the rest of Mesopotamia, but invaders also brought in new populations who, over centuries, inherited the science, culture, and land of the Kishites, Babylonians, and Akkadians. This is in line with a surprising study that showed that the ancient Natufian language clusters most closely to Niger-Congo languages. So their Natufians, who we have seen are black, and inhabited the Levant when they discovered agriculture, also happen to have a language that is closest and deeply rooted with Niger-Congo languages. And it is a language that is foreign to Semite Asiatic and European languages. This implies that during biblical times, what we call the Middle East today was, in fact, entirely black. White and Levantine peoples were the exception before 1000 BC, prior to the Persian invasions of the 5th and 6th centuries BC. The same way that black people today are now the exception in those regions. Let's return to Revelation. In Revelation 1:15 we read, "His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters." Biblical scholars will tell you that John was describing the glory of Jesus Christ. However, this interpretation avoids the obvious. The author is describing the feet of a typical black man. Black people worldwide will understand this. For those who do not have black skin, I suggest observing the skin color of African Americans at the beach. A close match would be exactly as John describes in Revelation. Thus, his hair is white and woolly, and his skin is dark brown, as if it has been burned in a furnace. If we set aside prejudice and decades of conditioning, it becomes clear that we are talking about none other than a black man. But it goes deeper, much deeper. In Song of Solomon 1:5 we read, I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Solomon was from the tribe of Judah. Does this not imply that the people of the tribe of Judah were black? Jeremiah 14:2 also states that the people of Judah were black. Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up. Jeremiah 14:2, KJV. If only a few verses described prominent individuals or an entire nation as black, we might accept the arguments of those who deny it, claiming, for example, that the verse in Revelation is merely a description of Jesus' hair. However, when such descriptions appear repeatedly throughout the Old and New Testaments, the implications become significant. Either the authors of these original texts were black, their entire civilization was black, or, as some would have us believe, the authors were white or Levantine, but chose to depict a black phenotype almost everywhere in the Bible. We must remember that the biblical texts we have today survived multiple rounds of edits and redaction. The Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD, focused on selecting the passages that would constitute our modern Bible. The subsequent loss of the throne by King James and his predominantly black Jacobite supporters is a separate issue. Nevertheless, the surviving verses are too numerous to ignore. They complement the genetic and archaeological evidence we have already discussed, namely, that during biblical times, the populations of North Africa, Egypt, and the Middle East were black. Black, like the God that Solomon describes as follows in Song of Solomon 5:11. His head is like the finest gold, his locks are wavy and black as a raven. As if the thick locks were not enough, the author also emphasizes their color, again, unmistakable. And again in Numbers 6:5, all the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separateth himself unto the Lord, he shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. This verse is part of the instructions for someone taking the Nazirite vow, a commitment to be set apart for God. In this verse, the person making the vow is commanded not to cut their hair for the entire duration of the vow, as a sign of their dedication and separation unto the Lord. By now, the pattern should be clear. Let's look at another example, Jeremiah 8:21. For the hurt of the daughter of my people am I hurt, I am black, astonishment hath taken hold on me. Here, the prophet Jeremiah clearly speaks to his own phenotype. Again, in Lamentations 5:10. Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. By now you must be asking yourself, why are there so many references of black people in the Bible? In fact, why are there black people at all in the Bible? Once you understand where all these stories really came from, it will all make sense. And we will see that next. Before we delve into the origins of the stories found in Christianity, a word to those who cannot separate the cultural from the spiritual. As we proceed, it will become increasingly clear that Christianity is, in many ways, a copy of Kemetism, the ancient African religious system. If you do not want to learn the truth about this because you know it will affect you negatively, please stop here. But for those of you who do not want to live a lie, and who finally want to understand where all this came from, and what these people looked like, these gods, these originators of religion, you should continue listening. Sebastian Cain's blog post offers some valuable insights. Imagine that Christianity lasts for another 1,000 years, and that after the flourishing of the story of Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and ascension for those 3 millennia, another religion replaces Christianity, but only by adapting the key themes and presuppositions of that former religion to a post-Christian social context. Now suppose that the priests of this post-Christian faith use their quasi-Christian mythos not to elevate the practitioners, but to degrade and control them, so that the very question of whether the post-Christian religion is syncretically related to the worship of Jesus becomes taboo. The fact that most Christians could engage in that thought experiment without seeing the irony in Christianity's actual relation to the ancient Egyptian worship of Osiris, Isis, and Horus is astonishing. If I begin citing the deeds of the god Osiris, it would not be difficult for you to recognize the figure that followed him 2,000 years later. You might then ask yourself a few questions. Horus was born of the Virgin Isis on December 25th, in a cave. A star in the east announced his birth, and he was visited by 3 wise men. He had an earthly father named Seb, which translates to Joseph. He was baptized by Anup the baptizer. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles, walking on water, raising El Osiris. He gave a sermon on the mount. He was crucified between 2 thieves. He was buried for 3 days and was resurrected. He was called Christ in the Egyptian language. It was written Krst. Osiris was also called the Anointed One, the Way, the Truth, and the Light, Messiah, Son of Man, etc. But it is not just the god Osiris. His mother, the goddess Isis, is the model from which the Virgin Mary comes. This is evident in all her iconography, even down to the famous pose of Mary holding a child. 3,000 years before, the goddess Isis was holding the baby Osiris in the exact same pose. This goddess became prevalent in almost all the cultures of the surrounding areas. Greeks, Romans, and many others would adopt her in multiple forms. In the picture below, you can see the same iconography of the goddess Isis in various Greek and Roman deities. And just like the goddess Isis before her, Mary, too, gave birth while still a virgin. This birth of God would then be followed and announced by 3 magi traveling to the region. This is symbolic of the winter solstice, when the 3 stars of Orion herald the new year. The figures of Set in Egyptian mythology and Satan in Christianity share symbolic and narrative parallels as antagonistic forces. However, Set is millennia older. Both Set and Satan embody chaos, destruction, and opposition to divine order. Set murders his brother Osiris, disrupts cosmic harmony, and battles Horus for kingship, symbolizing the struggle between order, Ma'at, and chaos, Isfet. Similarly, Satan in Christianity rebels against God, tempts humanity, e.g., Adam and Eve, Jesus in the wilderness, and seeks to corrupt creation. Both act as antagonists to a divine plan, though Set's role is more cyclical, a necessary force in Egyptian cosmology, while Satan is irredeemably evil. Set is associated with violence, storms, deserts, and foreign lands, elements tied to unpredictability and danger. Satan is linked to sin, deception, and hellfire, representing moral and spiritual corruption. Both are portrayed as tricksters. Set deceives Osiris into a coffin, while Satan manipulates through lies, e.g., the serpent in Eden. However, Set's chaos was not always wholly negative. He also protected Ra's solar bark from Apophis, showing ambiguity. Satan, by contrast, is unambiguously malevolent. Set is a god within the Egyptian pantheon, a legitimate, if disruptive, deity whose actions spur renewal, e.g., Horus's rise. Satan, however, is a fallen angel, a created being who defies God's authority. While Set's conflict with Horus ends in a negotiated balance, Horus rules Earth, Set controls storms, Satan's rebellion culminates in eternal defeat, Revelation 20:10. But the motifs are the same, and the key enabling roles of Set and Satan are highlighted. Set murders Osiris, indirectly enabling his resurrection as Lord of the Dead. To counterbalance the negative effect of the devil, ancient African traditional religion developed a concept that was also copied by later religions. This concept helped stabilize civilization for 3,000 years. Christianity and Judaism both find one of their most important pillars 2,000 years before they ever appeared. The famous tablets brought down by God, containing the laws dictating and regulating the behavior of Jewish society, when examined carefully, reveal that these laws existed in the exact same form in the 42 laws of Ma'at. Ma'at is the ancient African tradition from which balance can be obtained. This balance later became the God or principle that judges people at the end of their lives through the ceremony of the weighing of the heart. This ceremony existed on the walls of ancient African traditions well before it appears in the Bible. Its intent is the same: to determine if a life was just by weighing the heart against a feather. This makes sense because the Jewish people came out of Egypt in Africa, and when they did, they took with them the practices they had in Egypt. This is why the 10 Commandments are a subset of the true 42 Commandments of Ma'at. I encourage everyone to read the 42 laws, as they provide a strong moral framework for life. Of course, every religion has made it difficult for its followers to explore or understand aspects of other religions. But if your goal is truly to live a fulfilled life, what could be wrong with a moral code that says the following? I honor virtue. I am peaceful. I respect the property of others. I affirm that all life is sacred. I live in truth. I consume only my fair share. I offer words of good intent. I can be trusted. I care for the earth. I speak positively of others. I remain in balance with my emotions. I am trustful in my relationships. I spread joy. I do the best I can. I am forgiving. I am kind. I do good. I am humble. I achieve with integrity. I advance through my own abilities. What could be wrong with teaching these virtues to our children, to our next generation? I challenge anyone to think that society would be worse if these mantras were followed. These mantras can be found in all Afro-descendant societies. In multiple forms, they have survived. This is, in general, why people of African descent are known for their kind demeanor and souls. This does not mean that individuals cannot deviate from these principles, but it shows the power of establishing the proper moral framework, one that has lasted 5,000 years and needs to be reintroduced into our relationships. While it is romantic to review and reminisce about the power and influence of ancient wisdom and how it shaped modern religions, it is also important to realize that our ancestors arrived at these mantras through a process of continuous philosophical inquiry. I use these mantras and teach them to my children, because whether they are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or simply spiritual and moral seekers, these principles will guide them to a better life, one where the soaring eagle of our ancestors lighten our hearts with the feather of hope to rekindle the minds of those who have forgotten who they are. These are the real originators of the book, those who were said to be without history and yet birthed civilization itself. It is only through a diligent study of the past that one can perceive a mosaic of the self. Write in the comment which of these tidbits did the trick for you, and stay tuned for part 2.